I first met Ron January 31st, 2002, when he appeared on our UDC cable television show, Sound Advice, which goes out to 175,000 households. And he was with our founding father, Edgar Kahn, talking about youth court. And he was on the show in his capacity as co-chair of DC Coalition Against Drugs and Violence. And I was incredibly impressed by him then. I have followed his career from afar. He went on from the United States Attorney's Office, where he tried every kind of case there is for 4 or 5 years, to WilmerHale. That is a name brand. That is one of the top law firms. It may be the top law firm, and I want to add their donors to the law school every year. So we love WilmerHale. And has had an amazing career at WilmerHale for many, many years. And then last year, he thought, you know, what I need is a gigantic pay cut and a hugely problematic and difficult job. I think I'll apply to be the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. I serve on the Eleanor Holmes Norton Federal Law Enforcement Commission, and we interview all of the candidates for the Federal District Court, for the United States Attorney, for the U.S. Marshals, for both Superior Court, District Court, for the head of SOSA, and so on. And as you may have noticed, we had an 8-year gap without any Democrats having the opportunity to come into those kinds of positions. And when the Obama administration came in, and there were suddenly vacancies in these places, every Democrat in the city applied for those positions. The chairman of our commission felt that we should interview everyone. So I probably interviewed most of the people in this room and everyone you know. And Ron rose to the top. He was just a superstar. I think he was the unanimous recommendation by the commission. Eleanor Holmes Norton and President Obama agreed, and he is now our U.S. Attorney. And he's doing an amazing job. And I couldn't be more delighted to have him here, not only because I'm working to butter him up and Vince Cohen, his hiring partner for our law students. So those of you who want to be in the U.S. Attorney's Office as interns, come see me immediately. We really, really appreciate having the top law enforcement officer in the District of Columbia for the city here with us. We want him on our side, right? I'm delighted. So with that, let me introduce Ron Machen and let him bring his message.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and you guys are incredibly lucky to have one of the best deans in the country. And this law school was started by Edgar Kahn, who's a dear friend, has long been committed to public service, to helping residents of the district. So you have a legacy to the road too. I want to introduce just a few people here. Vincent Cohen is one person. He's my principal deputy assistant, and he's the #2 guy in the office. He is a DC native, born and raised here, and he does handle, among his many duties, he handles our hiring. So he has a task force that evaluates all the folks that want to be assistant U.S. attorneys, and he handles the hiring process. So we'd love to have some of you guys apply for positions, and obviously it'll go through him. You should be addressed in all your application material. I also want to introduce Wendy Polhouse. Wendy is an alum of UDC undergrad. She is my executive assistant for external affairs, which is community outreach. Does a fantastic job. Again, born and raised Southeast DC. Has been a prosecutor for a long time, and when I came in, I was immediately struck by her commitment and dedication to helping the residents of this great city, and put her in her position. She has done so many great things. You're going to hear about some of those things. Again, I want to thank Dean Broderick for inviting me to join this symposium. I have a deep admiration for guys can't hear me? Hey, does that work? Is it working?
Yes. It's on.
Is it on?
Yes.
All right.
You broke?
No, I got it. All right, here we go. If you can't hear me, I'll just speak up. But I have a deep admiration for the public spirited approach to education that happens at this law school, and for Dean Broderick's commitment to that approach. The work of this law school has been so critical to improving access to justice for so many district residents who are needy, so many district residents who are underserved. And I want to thank all of you for your contributions. By choosing to be educated here, you have already proven your commitment to putting the law to work for the community. And that's what we do at the U.S. Attorney's Office each and every day. And again, I'd love to see some of you. We have internships in the summer for law students. We'd love to see some of you apply for those internships. And we'd love to see you down the road be assistant U.S. attorneys representing the United States and the District of Columbia in our courts. Today's symposium is a testament to the relevance and the value of UDC's approach to legal education. The issues you're tackling today are incredibly important to the well-being of our entire community. And I congratulate all of you for asking the tough questions and thinking about how we can be innovative and effective in addressing drug abuse and drug addiction. As an assistant U.S. attorney prosecuting violent crime in D.C. and now as the U.S. attorney for D.C., and I have over 300 prosecutors in the largest U.S. attorney's office in the country. We handle all local and federal crime in the district. So we will handle everything from a drug possession case to a drug distribution case to murders and homicides in local court to more complex drug conspiracies that are handled in court to terrorism cases. We have defendants who have committed crimes against U.S. citizens in Afghanistan and Pakistan. We handle those cases in D.C. So it's an incredibly diverse job. But it's given me the opportunity to become all too familiar with the devastation that drugs bring to our community. Drugs can rob a child of a loving and attentive parent and thrust that child into a life of chaos and neglect. Drugs can take the promise of opportunity and success and replace it with the insatiable appetite for self-destruction that will crowd out all other ambitions. I would guess that nearly all of us have a family member, a colleague, a friend who has been a victim to drug addiction. Drugs also, and the violence that is often associated with them, can turn neighbor against neighbor, can turn streets of our city into war zones, where people are just struggling to protect their children each and every day. Here in D.C., drug abuse and addiction do very real damage that cannot be overlooked. A few months ago, we convicted a mother who, while high on PCP, stabbed her 7-year-old daughter in the chest and set her own house on fire. Later this week, the court will sentence a man who, while high on PCP, drove his van at twice the legal speed limit, crashed into a car that contained a mother and 4 children, killing the mother. And less sensationally, day after day, our courtrooms are filled with women who have fallen into lives of prostitution and men who have become petty thieves to feed their addiction. These are men and women who are very similar to us. They had big dreams, big plans, just like all of you do. But those have given way to addiction and depression. So these daily tragedies, they cry out for a response from law enforcement. I think in order, before we talk about that, we have to first place our response to crime in a historical context. 20 years ago, this country was at the height of a dramatic spike in crime and illegal drug use. Violent crime had quadrupled, and the use of heroin and cocaine had surged dramatically. But here in the district, the crack cocaine epidemic was devastating to our communities. Neighborhood streets were littered with empty crack bottles and spent shell casings. House parties and public gatherings were often shot up. You would hear the sounds of gunfire and people would scatter. In the early 90s, the city was suffering nearly 500 murders a year, and that earned D.C. the notorious label as the nation's murder capital. To put that in perspective, last year we had 135 murders in our city. Across the country, legislators responded to the crisis of drug-fueled violence with measures that focused on incarceration, 3 strikes laws, severe mandatory minimum sentences, and the elimination of parole. That focus on incarceration led to dramatic increases in the national prison population. Over the last 4 decades, the number of inmates in American prisons has increased 7-fold. And the United States now has the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world. In law enforcement in D.C., we do believe that public safety will require incarceration at times. You commit an act of violence against another person, even if fueled by drug addiction, there needs to be accountability. Actions have to have consequences. The reason Mr. Cohen and I were late this afternoon coming here, we were at a sentencing for a violent member of an MS-13 gang. He has a mandatory sentence of life, which he will probably receive in the next hour or so while we're here. Plus, he will probably receive 150 years for his crimes, committed brutal acts of violence. And there's a place for that. You have to have a system to make folks accountable. And people have to understand if they commit violent acts, they will be held accountable and they will be going to prison. And indeed, last year when our office charged almost 20,000 cases in both the D.C. Superior Court and the Federal Court of D.C., we saw the lowest homicide count in nearly 50 years in our city. The national violent crime rate was down 40% since the height of the crack cocaine epidemic in the late 80s and early 90s. However, for all of our successes in law enforcement, we've had many over the last few years, we all know that incarceration alone cannot be the answer. We know that we can't arrest enough people, build enough prisons to solve this problem. Imprisonment has real social costs that unfortunately have been felt all too often in the African American community. And we know that we must do more as members of law enforcement. From my perspective, from a prosecutor's perspective, the most important things we can do are to be both fair and flexible in how we approach our cases. Fairness is important to the system because it builds the public trust and confidence, which are both vital factors to the effective administration of justice. When the system is perceived as unfair, what happens is witnesses refuse to cooperate, juries engage in nullification, and the public at large loses faith in the rule of law. That's why in undertaking the criminal justice response to drug abuse, we must have laws that are predictable, fair, and do not create unwarranted racial disparities. One of the greatest impediments to public trust and confidence in the criminal justice system over the past 15 years was the unwarranted disparity in the laws applying to crack and cocaine powder. As many of you may know, but I realize you guys are younger, so you may not know, in the wake of the overdose death of University of Maryland basketball star Len Bias, Congress passed the 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act, which created a 5-year mandatory minimum for anyone who sold 5 grams of crack or 500 grams of powder cocaine. In the same way, those who sold 50 grams of crack were sentenced to the same 10-year mandatory minimum as those who sold 5,000 grams of powder cocaine. 2 years later, Congress went even further and established a 5-gram, 5-year mandatory minimum for the simple possession of crack cocaine. The consequences of that disparity were spelled out in real and frank racial terms. In 2006, 82% of individuals convicted of federal crack cocaine offenses were African American, while just 9% were white. That same year, federal powder cocaine offenders were 14% white, 27% African American, and 58% Hispanic. Some very well-intentioned people sought to justify the disparity on the grounds that violence was more often associated with crack offenses. And that claim was not without some merit. Indeed, the violence associated with crack cocaine, the turf battles in D.C., was largely responsible for the tremendous spike we saw in the murder rate. And it is true that crime itself imposes disproportionate costs on minorities. Nearly half of all murder victims in the United States are African American. So some claim that the harsh disparities were intended to protect the African American communities from the urban warfare that was so commonly associated with crack cocaine. But whatever the reasons were for the disparities, establishing a 100-to-1 difference had the pernicious effect of taking a serious toll on the public's trust in the inherent fairness of our judicial system. For that reason, I'm so proud to be a part of this Justice Department under Eric Holder, who was the former U.S. Attorney for D.C., now the Attorney General, that asked Congress to completely eliminate the crack powder sentencing disparity. And I'm proud to have been appointed by President Obama, a president that signed the Fair Sentencing Act, which went a long way towards correcting this historical disparity. Going forward, I'm convinced that law enforcement must be ever vigilant about identifying and addressing unwarranted disparities in the criminal justice system, particularly when those disparities fall along racial lines. We must be aggressive in rooting out systemic and individual biases that result in unequal justice. That's the commitment of my office, and that's the commitment of the Justice Department, to do equal justice under the law. Achieving fairness in our prosecution of the drug laws also requires us to be flexible. It is, of course, a fundamental principle of our system that people who commit similar crimes and have similar culpability should be treated the same. But in pursuit of that goal, sometimes prosecutors have been asked to apply rigid standards that do not allow discretion that is necessary to make distinctions to account for the facts and circumstances of each individual case. Instead, prosecutors have been required to charge the most serious offense possible without undertaking the careful, individualized assessment necessary to strike the appropriate balance. This has resulted in draconian charges in some instances, particularly in drug offenses. For that reason, the U.S. Attorney's Office for D.C. has long embraced the principle asserted most recently by Attorney General Holder last year to all U.S. attorneys across the country when making charging and sentencing decisions. Attorney General Holder explained that the reasoned exercise of prosecutorial discretion is essential to the fair, effective, and even-handed administration of federal criminal laws. I share the Attorney General's view. Equal justice demands individualized justice. At every stage of the process, at charging, when negotiating a plea, when advocating for a sentence, prosecutors must be careful to take into account all the facts and circumstances. The crime, its impact on the victim, the community, the defendant's criminal history, and federal resources that are available, and federal priorities. All of that must be considered when prosecuting. There's no doubt that giving prosecutors flexibility does come with some risk. Giving prosecutors discretion creates a risk that prosecutors will unconsciously or consciously allow prejudices, biases, or irrelevant factors to influence their decision-making. However, to a large degree, I believe those risks can be minimized through close monitoring and the consistent effort to train and guide our prosecutors on the appropriate factors that should be considered as mitigating or aggravating. Despite the risks, I believe that a healthy dose of prosecutorial discretion is essential to the fair operation of the criminal justice system. We simply cannot write rules that are complicated or nuanced enough to address the infinite variety of facts and circumstances presented by each defendant in each criminal case. We must choose honorable, fair, and impartial people to serve as prosecutors, give them the information and training necessary to do their jobs, and permit them the flexibility they need to seek justice in each individual case. From my time working among hundreds of dedicated public servants in my office, I know prosecutors are up to the task. Even as we work to sustain and build a fair and flexible system for enforcing the drug laws, we also recognize that a traditional criminal justice model is not enough on its own. We must be innovative and aggressive in creating prevention strategies to address our needs. Here in D.C., our U.S. Attorney's Office has recognized that for a long time. And we have embarked on numerous innovative projects with our criminal justice partners to reduce crime and improve public safety and health. In 1993, the D.C. Superior Court established its first drug intervention program. called drug court. Some of you have probably heard of it, or maybe even represented individuals that were appeared before the drug court. This court replaced the traditional prosecutorial model with courts that provided a comprehensive treatment program, along with swift and certain application of penalties when defendants fail regular drug tests. Working with our partners in the courts and the pretrial services agency, we developed criteria that would allow drug-using defendants charged with non-violent crimes to participate in this program. This ambitious experiment proved that drug courts could reduce drug use for defendants during pretrial release, reduce recidivism, and reduce drug-related social problems. The success in DC and other innovator jurisdictions led to the rapid expansion of drug courts. There are now nearly 2,500 drug courts nationwide, and more than 1 million Americans have graduated from drug courts. Statistics show that the programs have demonstrated success. In 2008, 1/3 of the adults arrested in DC tested positive for cocaine. This was just half the peak reached in 1985, when 64% of the people arrested tested positive for cocaine. More importantly, nationwide, 75% of drug court participants remain arrest-free 2 years after graduating from the program. One of the most promising findings of recent studies is that drug courts are particularly effective at preventing relapses among those with long histories of drug abuse. DC's drug court is now a national and international model. I recently attended a drug court session in DC Superior Court where Kenneth Clark, the British Justice Minister, joined us to observe and learn lessons he could take back to the United Kingdom. Secretary Clark watched Judge Weisberg gently but firmly use incentives and sanctions to keep former drug abusers on the road to recovery and out of jail. During that hearing, one participant, and this was not scripted, genuinely thanked the court with tears in his eyes. He thanked the prosecutor, he thanked his attorney for giving him a chance to seek treatment, for believing in him when he didn't believe in himself. We can be proud to know that the practices and procedures for combating drug abuse developed right here in DC are now being used to transform justice systems around the world. Here in DC, we're continuing to innovate and lead the nation with creative approaches to seemingly intractable problems. In 2002, the East of the River Community Court was established with the U.S. Attorney's Office's support. It was implemented in Wards 7 and 8. That court handles all misdemeanor cases east of the river and emphasizes diversion and community service as the forms of punishment, while at the same time focusing on social services programs that can combat the root causes of criminal behavior. The Mental Health Court was established in 2007. Again, this court had the full support of my office. It was established to address the needs of mentally ill defendants by offering them diversion opportunities for their conduct that they could successfully utilize mental health and other support services that could assist them in overcoming their illnesses. However, I am most proud of the fact that our office has not just supported innovative court programs, but we have engaged directly in the battle. This is most evident in our work to help support former offenders who are leaving prison and returning to the community. And our work has been led by Wendy Polhouse, who I just introduced to you. The transition from prison is not easy. As most of you know, returning offenders face serious challenges, like finding a place to live, finding steady work, and staying away from the people and places that led them into trouble in the first place. These challenges are significant enough that to overcome them, they will need our help. The truth is, we don't do enough to help prepare offenders to acclimate back into society. Individuals deserve a second chance, and we have to make sure that they have a real shot at success. My office and this Justice Department recognize that returning citizens face serious obstacles, and we're committed to helping reentrants surmount those obstacles. Last year, the Justice Department gave out $100 million in Second Chance Act grants to support reentry efforts nationwide. The grants were distributed to government agencies and nonprofit organizations to provide a wide range of services: employment assistance, substance abuse treatment, housing, family programming, mentoring, and and other services that could help reduce recidivism. Here in DC, one of those grants went to Serenity Incorporated, which offers mentoring, substance abuse counseling, life skills training, and other services to former offenders who are returning to our community. The work of Serenity and other community organizations is so important because reentry is a public safety issue. 95% of all prisoners incarcerated today will eventually be released and return to their communities. 2/3 of them will be rearrested within 3 years. Half will be reincarcerated within 3 years. That revolving door means we're not doing something right. To safeguard our neighborhoods and families, we have to give returning citizens the tools they need in order to transform their lives. One of the biggest challenges for returning citizens is securing stable employment. Many employers are simply not interested in hiring former offenders, especially in this economic climate. But here is the simple truth. Our failure to give former offenders the opportunity to work is a recipe for recidivism. 1 year after release, 60% of former inmates are unemployed. Without any opportunities in the legitimate labor market, it's no surprise that many of them will return to a life of crime. When society refuses to give ex-offenders a legitimate job to pay their bills, we're shooting ourselves in the foot because it's only a matter of time before they return to illegal activity. In my office, we decided to confront this challenge head on. Just a few weeks ago, we convened our very first working group of DC employers, mainly made up of small business owners here in the city. We explained to them the benefits and addressed their concerns about hiring former offenders. We laid out the legal rules and all the resources available to employers who are willing to reach out and give someone a second chance. We explained all the steps that we are taking to get former offenders ready for work, which is mainly done by CSOSA, and appeal to the employers to give our returning neighbors an opportunity. I'm hopeful that this message, coming from the office that is responsible for putting individuals in prison and is responsible for putting the individuals who are coming out in DC in prison, will send a clear message how critical this effort is. Again, it's one of the first programs of this kind that's been done. This is being pushed by the Justice Department, and we are fully on board. Employment is not the only challenge for returning citizens. Many times their chances of success are limited by lifelong addictions that serve as stumbling blocks. More than 60% of people arrested in this country are regular drug users. And I want to repeat that. More than 60% of the people arrested in this country are regular drug users. Half of those in prison are addicted to drugs. But less than 10% of them get the drug treatment they need while in prison. And that's a shame because we know how effective drug treatment programs can be. The Federal Bureau of Prisons operates a residential drug abuse program. Graduates of that program are 16% less likely to be arrested, have their supervised release revoked, and be returned to prison than those who did not participate in the program. There's too much on the line for individuals and for our communities to fail in delivering much needed treatment services to offenders. What we in law enforcement have long recognized is that we cannot win this battle alone. The daily tragedies and the national threat created by drug abuse demands a coordinated and comprehensive response from government, from doctors, from people of faith, and from the nonprofit community. Last year, the Obama administration announced an unprecedented government-wide public health approach to reduce drug abuse and its consequences in the United States. This effort includes spending over $9 billion on treatment services for abusers and over $1 billion on drug education programs. It also includes placing a heavier emphasis on early intervention programs and health settings, aligning criminal justice policies and public health systems to divert nonviolent offenders, and supporting international allies to disrupt the flow of drugs into the United States. This renewed, balanced effort could not come at a better time. For all of our work, drug use in America is once again on the rise. 1 in 10 teenagers report using drugs in the last month. 1 in 5 young adults ages 18 to 25 report using drugs in the last month. Prescription drug abuse is now at epidemic levels. And those trends are reflected on the roads. A recent government survey showed that 1 in 8 weekend and nighttime drivers tested positive for illegal substances. Drug use poses real threats to our families, our neighborhoods, and our country. Responding to those threats requires a balanced strategy of prevention, treatment, enforcement, and international cooperation. The criminal justice system cannot and should not provide our only response, but I'm firmly convinced that law enforcement is a critical part of the solution. In the District of Columbia, through drug courts and reentry programs, we have shown that innovative law enforcement strategies can help to break the cycle of drugs and crime. The law, when employed with compassion, intelligence, and an unfailing commitment to equality, is an extremely powerful tool to reducing drug use and its harmful consequences. Today I want to call on each of you to continue to draw on your creativity, your education, and your life experiences to develop more community-based strategies and programs to address the toll that drugs take on our neighborhoods. You're the next generation of leaders in public service who will be asked to set aside old ideas and failed ideologies in search of solutions that will keep young people from falling into addiction and help lift those who have fallen. You are the folks who will have to put an end to the drug-fueled violence that has taken so many sons and daughters. The responsibility is a weighty one, but I know under the leadership of Dean Broderick and the rest of the staff here at UDC, we will be up to the challenge. I look forward to seeing all of you achieve great success in your careers and to making this city and this country proud. Thank you.
Questions, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, okay. Should I stay here?
Yes, right here. The Attorney General is gracious enough to answer a few questions. Who would like
United
that?
States Attorney.
United States Attorney, excuse me, is gracious enough to answer a few
Not
questions.
yet.
Gave you an unofficial promotion. Yes, Bart, and then yourself.
I like what you said about the role of prosecutorial discretion, and you said that there were, you couldn't write enough regulations basically to circumvent that role, that prosecutorial role. So what is the broad objective of prosecutorial discretion? What do you view as the broad objective?
Mr. Attorney, that's Mr. U.S. Attorney, that's a former detective.
Oh, yeah.
St. Louis Police Department, and now proud, graduating to be senior.
Oh, good.
And a member of the law review, too.
Well, again, it goes to what we were just talking about. Every case, there are so many different circumstances. And I was talking earlier to Mr. Sterling, we were talking about how in certain cases, for instance, we will use the drug laws, as harsh as they were, to our advantage. And so if, for instance, you're a dangerous individual, and if you're a detective, you know that we may have that intelligence that we believe you hurt people in the past, but for whatever reason, weren't able to bring cases, maybe witnesses weren't available, things like that. We may use that discretion in order to protect the community and charge you with crime and actually seek a harsher sentence based on your own individualized circumstances. But that's what you have to have. You have to have discretion, because if you don't have that, if you just have to apply the same set of rules to everybody, it can result in real inequalities as folks are treated just as harshly as possible, no matter what the case.
Yes, sir. Tell us what role you played in the Fenty administration.
Yeah, how you doing? Sean Goff, former UDC alum, and I was senior advisor to the Mayor for Youth Affairs. Ran the programs that focused around civic engagement. I guess it's twofold. One, we've seen the rise just with the population of youth that I've worked with PCP use in the District of Columbia. Not quite to the level of the 80s, but it's no real evidence that says, you know, from NPD's data, and I'm not sure what you guys have, but number one, I guess, what's your opinion on, you know, the change of the law that is very similar to a mandatory minimum, where one joint that's dipped, a cigarette that's dipped in PCP can get a sentence up to 3 years, And then a twofold question is, UDC back in the day when Lorton was here, used to,
Let me handle one at a time.
And by the way, what's the punishment for just possession of marijuana? It's not dipped, PCP.
well, it's 5 pounds you'll get a federal guideline.
Basically, three differences now, which is a change. But I'll tell you, and I think if Chief Lanier was here, she would echo this. PCP in particular is a very dangerous drug. I cited 2 cases where PCP was involved, and the level of violence, the level of destruction was as great as it can be. And we see that a lot. We see in the PCP cases, there's more, people are more willing to engage the police. People don't really realize, have no memory of what they're engaging in, and they become extremely violent and volatile. And so there's no doubt that it's a very dangerous drug. And so we have to take that very seriously, and I think it needed a stiffer sentence.
All right.
I don't know if you had a second question.
Well, let's spread it around one per. Yes, ma'am. Public.
Thank you for your words. You spoke eloquently about how you have a policy sort of bringing in what Barack Obama's interest in jobs. But I'm wondering about a parallel program dealing with education for not just ex-offenders, but particularly before they're released, say within a couple of years. Because as you know, we've got a lot of people in jail who have not graduated from high school in many instances.
Okay.
Well, I believe the Bureau of Prisons does have a lot of programs and training for individuals while they're incarcerated to help them learn job skills. And certainly, when we see them and they're initially released, a lot of times it's under supervised conditions. And we work with the Court Services and Offender Supervision Agency, which is CSOSA. They do a tremendous amount of training in this area to try to get individuals ready so that they can be productive members of the workforce.
But what about college, though?
I'm sorry.
What about college? I mean, Obama speaks about, science, technology, we need to educate our kids. I mean, we can't just think of ex-offenders as people who need nothing more than high literacy. Let's just put it that way. What about post-secondary education, college, science, technology?
Well, again, I can't speak for the Bureau of Prisons, but I believe those sort of programs are offered, at least GEDs. But normally, when you're talking about the prison population, there's a big hurdle to overcome before somebody's going to be ready for college. I applaud those that are able to do that, and I actually know some ex-offenders who have been able to go to college. But for most of the cases, when you look at crime, especially violent crime, there's a very close association with truancy and high school dropouts. And so you're not talking about individuals that are ready to go necessarily go to college. You're talking about individuals we're trying to get who are reading at the 3rd and 4th grade level, and we're just trying to get proficient to get their GED and become productive members of the workforce.
For the U.S. Attorney schedule as well as for our own, I'll take about 2 more questions. I'll have one over here, Professor Coleman, and then the last one there, 3. Go. Make it quick, please.
You may not be able to answer this, but last week the DEA raided a number of medical marijuana facilities in Montana, and the U.S. Attorney for Montana issued a statement supporting that. And her statement, as I recall, only cited violations of federal crimes that these institutions were alleged to do. It seemed to me to be counter to Attorney General Holder's instructions that the Justice Department would stay out of cases where the facilities were abiding by state law.
Well,
one coming here too, right? Medical marijuana?
Yeah, and I can't speak specifically about that case, but I will tell you what the department's policy is. The department is not interested in prosecuting individuals who are using marijuana for medicinal purposes in accordance with state law. I will tell you that normally what we have seen in different states, and in California, I'm good friends with U.S. Attorneys in California and Colorado where they have medicinal marijuana legalized. You see individuals that get into the cultivation and dispensary business not for treating individuals, but for the commercial purpose of selling these narcotics under the guise of growing legally. And when those sort of cases occur, it's a violation of federal law, and that will be enforced. And again, I can't speak specifically about Montana, but I think that is, I don't think there's a natural inconsistency there without knowing more of the facts.
Mr. Thomas.
Just want to follow up the question before last, your conversation about the Bureau of Prisons and education. The vast majority of the DC inmates, and really all inmates who are incarcerated, have unmet special education needs. The Bureau of Prisons doesn't do special education. They don't follow the IDA. So the Revitalization Act that sent our prisoners into the BOP makes our prisoners the only locally state convicted, state tried inmates in the country who go off to prison and don't have access to special ed services. So we'd really like to work with you on that issue, because it is a way of infusing all sorts of educational services that our inmates need that would help them reintegrate more successfully. And I think there's a lot we can do together to make that happen.
Well, we'd love to. I mean, I can put you in touch with the right people. Again, that's not in my area of responsibility, but I'd be more than happy to look into that. I will tell you, one of the biggest problems, and we go out usually 3 or 4 nights a week. I've spoken to almost every high school here in the city.
Yeah.
Truancy is a tremendous problem. And, you know, by the time somebody gets to prison and their educational needs haven't been met, it really is too late. We got to start attacking this problem early.
Totally agree. And the law still allows for and requires educational services that are aimed at reintegration into the economy. So we can do that. But in terms of truancy, we have the unusual experience of being at Blue 2 days ago, was it? For a suspension hearing. And they allowed that last year, they told us last year at Blue, with 1,100 students, in terms of in-school and out-of-school suspensions, they had 1,400 suspensions. We were at a truancy task force meeting with 2 deputy mayors and the chief of police and the presiding judge of the family division that same day. So if you're going to deal with truancy, stop kicking kids out of school. I mean, everybody in the country knows, if you do look at the research, that kicking kids out of school doesn't work, and it enhances, it creates truancy. So we really do need to work together on that.
I'm very interested in this issue. I'd be happy to talk to you. There used to be truancy centers. They used to follow up with support services for folks that were kicked out of school.
That's all that's finding the marginal number of kids who are actually truant.
Yeah.
We really need to deal with 1,400 exclusions from one high school.
Yeah.
That's creating truancy. Those kids don't want to go back after they've been kicked out 5 times. It's like a war zone in some of the schools. We've got to deal with that.
Yeah.
Last question, ma'am.
I'm Jerry Hush. I'm actually going to change the tone slightly, to raise the bar. I'm going to address what you said about thinking outside the box. And I've actually worked on international drug policy around 20 years ago, so the real sort of coming around me. And one of the things I'm struck with is that you're dealing with very practical and pragmatic daily concerns. But what needs to happen, it sounds, is so there has to be literally a paradigm shift, so that the laws that were written with fixed term or related to specific substances actually be completely rewritten. Because the issue is not the substance. You've used the term drugs in a very broad sweep. And each substance has a very different history and a very different relationship to the user in terms of behavioral outcomes. So one of the things that we have to do is rethink here in the U.S. especially, and look at the way our laws are structured, work to change the laws so that instead of focusing on the substance which is utilized, and has generally been in cannabis or cocaine or with opiates, and that we begin to look at the implications of the action. Because I think if we don't do this much larger shift, your desire to have specific and to look very much in each case specifically, where the law becomes...
Do you have a question, ma'am?
Well, I'm trying to see how can we do that, because we can have symposia like this.
All right.
We can be in law schools, and unless there is a really fundamental change in the way in which we conceptualize the legal process, we're going to have another 20 years of these discussions. And
So the question, for those of you who might not be able to hear, are drug laws focus on specific substances, whether it's marijuana, cocaine, or marijuana dipped in PCP? And she says, can we focus more on some of the consequences of what drugs cause in our society?
Well, again, as I understand the question, there's not a lot I can really say on that. My job is to enforce the laws as written, and we try to be as involved and active as we can on the prevention side of things. But ultimately, my #1 mission is to enforce the laws and bring justice to those who are harmed and victims in society. So I think it's a novel thought. It's open for discussion, but I'm probably not the guy to respond to that.
Well, let's give a round for U.S. Attorney.